This is my sliding workshop door. I installed it a few years ago. I have a video about making that on my channel. And it works great, but it has one issue in particular that really bugs me, and I finally want to fix it in this video. I used a relatively inexpensive rail kit and there's no problem with that, but the end stop here that catches the door and should hold it shut is just this piece of plastic. When I slam the door shut too hard, it just bounces back, and when I don't slam it hard enough, it won't close all the way. Getting it just right is really hard. The solution I have in mind is some kind of hook shaped like this that fits into a hole in the door frame, and when it's fully closed, holds it in place something like so to keep it shut, and to open it again you can tilt it up with some kind of door handle. I guess I'll figure stuff out while I'm doing it. Uninstalling the door is pretty simple, just removing the cover and loosening a couple of bolts. I think the simplest way is to just cut out this whole section and then make some new block with all the locking mechanism integrated that I can screw into there. I made a template sized with the cutout I wanted to create out of cheap material, drew it onto the door and cut out the bulk with the jigsaw. I quickly noticed some blowout of the wood, but scoring along the cut with a knife fixes that. There you can see it, no more blowout. Then, with a flush trim bit and the template clamped in place, I could clean the cuts. Hey! What? Would you close the door, please? It's really loud. Ah, closing the door? Sure, of course I can do that. It's closed again. Such an asshole. I actually still have some of the same material left over, and it's enough to screw up once. This one. It's pretty good. I designed something on a computer that I think could work, and the first step is now to make this hook-shaped piece out of metal. I have a scrap piece of angle iron something here. That should work. Now let the fun with the hacksaw begin. What about the scene where you actually cut the steel with the bandsaw? Yeah, cut that. Yeah, we should better cut that. Don't worry. No need for a bandsaw when you have video editing to improve your cutting speed. But I actually cut the rest of the shape by hand with the hacksaw and some files. But sometimes I forget that a file is no hammer. Is that the right way to use a file? Spring is in the back. I think this should work. I hacked together this working prototype off camera. Let me show you how it works. The hook goes in the middle with a bearing on either side. This here represents the door handle, and then just a bolt through everything. The pin in the back of the hook keeps the spring in place. This screw on top makes sure that the hook is kept parallel when it's in its neutral position and doesn't tilt down too far. And the third screw right here is where a screw of the handle will push against to lift it up. And it's also a fine adjustment at the same time. It seems a bit complicated, but let me show you what it can do now. This block here represents the handle, and when I rotate it, it lifts up the hook as intended to open the door. But when I close the door, the hook can move independent and doesn't move the handle, and I wanted exactly that. I don't want the handle to move when I close the door. But that functionality is actually not complicated, it's just because the hook and the handle can move independent of each other. And the adjustment screw in the back to keep the hook parallel just seemed necessary, so this bevel always catches at the right point of the closing bracket in the door frame. Now I just need to transplant all of this into the lock block. Yeah, that's what I call it, lock block. It first gets a curved slot that I create with a series of cuts with a brad point drill bit. then holes for the bearings and the bolt, and then a centered slot for the hook, which I began on the router table by cutting from both sides to make it centered. The shallow slot then acts as a guide for the drill bit, and I finished the slot again with a series of holes. Next, I printed some paper templates for the handles, glued them onto some scrap of walnut, and cut it to shape. I should record that again. Unfortunately, the position of this hole wasn't quite right, and I got a crack right here, so I can't use them, and made new ones out of plywood. And with these I have everything to do a first test assembly. First part is the spring. The lock block has one screw installed here that comes out inside here, and that's where the spring catches. And I just need to catch the other end with the pin. Then two washers, a bearing, another washer, this handle, a brass washer for looks, and then a bolt. Through everything. Same on this side.
Washer, washer, bearing, washer, handle, washer.
Nut. Assembled like this, you can better see how it works. So both handles can move independent of each other, and both their screws push against the hook to lift it up, but the hook can move up without the handles moving. I think that's a pretty simple and safe solution that should not fail, and I won't accidentally lock myself in the workshop, because if that fails, these bolts would shear in half, and I don't think that's happening. Next I need some steel plate where the hook can hook into, and that means more filing. Yeah! Looks good and seems to work. I need to figure out the right mounting position, and I do that by measuring from the inner edge of the hook to the floor, and I transfer that mark to the frame. The sides I could transfer directly, and I just center that out here. That's where it needs to go. I present to you the, at the moment, most useless door handle. Few things need to happen. First of all, this metal plate needs to be sunken and flush with this wood surface. That was planned, I just didn't do it now. And the spring needs to be a bit stronger. And then I of course need to screw it in place. I also beveled the front edges because that seemed right. For mounting screws, I made a one-time use pocket hole jig out of scrap wood and one hole in the center. And now, does it work? It does. Nice. Now my design choice of the handle should also be clear, because as you disengage the hook, you push in the right direction to open the door at the same time. This noise is so satisfying. I just do that a couple hundred times and then I get back to the video. With this now working, I can start on finishing it, and I still need to fix a few parts. First of all, the handle is still quite flimsy and I don't really want to push or pull on the door with the handle, so there needs to be some kind of other door pull. Then I would like the handles to also have some kind of positive end stop so they don't flap around like that. And I would like to have another spring for both handles so they get pushed into their positive stop. Making an end stop is pretty simple. I just drilled a hole for a metal pin right here, and that does the trick. For a door pull, I made this relatively complicated piece, which screws on here. This provides extra support for the handle, and when you open it, it fits nicely underneath here. And then you have a much bigger surface area to grab on to open the door, and on the other side to close it. Underneath, I could make another cutout with a metal pin, and here can be a spring. This just pushes against the back of the handle, and that works. That's great. One issue still is that in order to be able to fully open the door again, I need a cutout in the door frame for this new handle. The cutout is done. And it works. Fully open. And that wraps up this little project. Was it worth making this when you can buy such a locking mechanism for like 20 bucks and spend all that time on making that? I would say yes, because making that does not teach you how to save money or time, but it teaches you a lot of problem solving. I had a totally different mechanism for lifting this hook shape piece in the beginning, and while I was making it, it just didn't work out at all. And then I eventually came up with a much simpler solution. And also a custom handle like this one, I think it's really hard to get or to buy. So sure, not a project for everybody, but definitely a good practice for developing or improving on skills and problem solving. Oh yeah, and you definitely can't buy the satisfaction you get from building something like this that then works in the end and makes a noise like this. So good.